Hello, and welcome to Once Upon a Time in Black History. I'm your host, Tamara Shiloh, author, educator, and owner of the Multicultural Bookstore in Richmond, California. This is my new podcast that can be heard on Anchor, Apple, iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, and SoundCloud. Check us out and be sure to visit my website at onceuponatimeInBlackHistory.com. So today we'll be talking about Onesimus, the first stage to eradicate smallpox. Terrifying news had reached Boston. The infectious, debilitating disease, smallpox, had reached the colonial town and was spreading rapidly. Its first victims, passengers on a ship from the Caribbean, were shut up in a house identified only by a red flag that read, "God have mercy on this house." Hundreds of Bostonians began to flee for their lives. The 1721 epidemic wiped out over 14% of Boston's population. As death took over the city, an enslaved West African known only as Onesimus suggested a potential way to keep people from getting sick. He described a process of rubbing pus from an infected person into an open wound on the arm. Once the infected substance was introduced into the body, the person who underwent the procedure was inoculated against the disease. What Onesimus proposed was not a vaccination, but it did trigger the recipient's immune response and protect it against the disease most of the time. Intrigued by Onesimus's idea, a Puritan minister, Cotton Mather, who purchased him, and a doctor, Zebediel Bolston, undertook a bold experiment to try and stop smallpox in its tracks. Years prior, though, Mather didn't trust Onesimus and described his behavior as thievish and calling him wicked and useless. No kidding. He looked down on what he called the devilish rights of Africans and worried that enslaved people might learn to rebel. Well, guess what? We did. But after Onesimus shared with him an approach to the disease, Mather then considered Onesimus a pretty intelligent fellow. Really? Onesimus admitted that he had had smallpox and then didn't. He had an operation which had given him something of the smallpox and would forever preserve him from it. And whoever had the courage to use it was forever free of the fear of it. Fascinated, Mather spoke with other slaves about this procedure, a practice he then learned had been used successfully in Turkey and China. With the hopes that the process would further prevent smallpox, Mather began to spread the news throughout Massachusetts, but had no idea how unpopular the idea would be. Mather soon felt the wrath of his fellow white Americans. Well, welcome to the U.S. The same prejudices that caused Mather to distrust Onesimus made the white colonists reluctant to undergo a medical procedure developed by a black man. He was ridiculed, threatened, and shunned by other preachers. But in 1721, when the smallpox epidemic took over Boston, Mather and Bolston got their chance to test the power of inoculation. Bolston inoculated his son, his slaves, and other residents in Boston. Of the 242 people inoculated, only 6 died. All right. 1 in 40, as opposed to 1 in 7 deaths among the population of Boston who didn't undergo the procedure. Now, whether Onesimus lived to witness the success of the technique he introduced to Mather is unknown. The details of his later life, other than the fact that he partially purchased his freedom, are unclear. However, what is clear is that the knowledge he passed on saved hundreds of lives and led to the eventual eradication of smallpox worldwide. Now imagine that.